Okay, so this story is going to be our first chapter Friday story. They just got added on to Epic, and I am so thrilled. It's called The Sisters Grimm. I have read every single one of these, and they are fantastic. They are one of my favorite series I have ever read. So it is by Michael Buckley, and it's called The Sisters Grimm, The Fairy Tale Detectives. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So there is a little preface here, okay? In the distance, a thunderous bellow rang out, followed by the terrible sound of falling trees and a stampede of terrified animals. It was coming, and there was no way to outrun it. Still, Sabrina and Daphne had to try. They sprinted as fast as they could, fighting with every step the dense forest branches that scratched at their face and arms. "We have to find a way to stop it," Daphne cried between gasps. Sabrina knew her little sister was right. But how? There were two children versus a vicious monster. "I'll think of something," she said, dragging her sister behind an enormous oak tree for a much-needed rest. Sabrina squeezed Daphne's hand to reassure her, while she forced air into her own burning lungs. Her words sounded empty in her ears. She didn't have a plan, and even if she did, it wouldn't make a difference. The creature was on top of them. Splintering wood and damp soil rained from the sky as the tree they crouched behind was violently uprooted. The two girls looked up into the horrible face above them and felt scorching breath blow through their hair. What had happened to our lives? Sabrina wondered. When did the world become unrecognizable? And what had happened to her, the 11-year-old girl who only had 2 days prior had been an orphan on a train? So that's the background knowledge, okay? So we already know the two main characters. And why don't you tell me how you think she feels right now, the older of the two sisters. How do you think she feels? 2 days ago. "I'm going to die of boredom here," Sabrina Grimm thought as she looked at the train window at Ferryport Landing, New York, approaching in the distance. The little town seemed to be made mostly of hills and trees next to the cold, gray Hudson River. Endless acres of evergreen forest surrounded it, as if trying to hide its existence from the rest of the world. A few 2- and 3-story buildings huddled around what appeared to be the town's only street. Sabrina couldn't see any movie theaters, malls, or museums, and she felt using the word town to describe Ferryport Landing was a bit of a stretch. Now we know where they are. That is our setting. The weather wasn't helping. It was raining, and rain always made her melancholy. It had been raining the day her parents abandoned her a year and a half ago, and it still made her heart ache. She remembered the day clearly, rushing home that afternoon with a report card safely tucked under her raincoat, excited about her A's in math and English and her B in science, a little disappointed by her C- in gym. She proudly taped her grades to the refrigerator for everyone to see when they got home. It seemed odd that her parents weren't there, but Sabrina didn't worry until Daphne's kindergarten teacher called to find out why no one had picked up the little girl. That night, the girls slept in their parents' bed, waiting for them to come home, while thunder crashed in the sky outside. When the social workers came 3 days later to take them away, it was still raining, and Sabrina's report card was still hanging on the refrigerator, awaiting its praise. For all Sabrina knew, it was still there. The police investigated the disappearance. They searched the family's New York City apartment for clues. They interviewed neighbors and coworkers. They dusted for fingerprints and filed reports. But Henry and Veronica Grimm had vanished into thin air. Months later, the police found their abandoned car, deserted in a lonely park 50 miles north of the city. The only clue was the blood-red handprint on the dashboard that turned out to be paint, but didn't lead to anything else. The investigation came to a dead end, and the cops eventually gave up the search. The girls were placed under the care of social services at first. A nice but overworked man named Todd searched for a next of kin, someone who could take them in, but came up as empty as the police. No aunts, uncles, grandparents, brothers, sisters, or even distant, twice-removed cousins existed. Todd promised to keep trying, but when Sabrina and Daphne were moved to an orphanage, they never saw him again. Sabrina shook off the sad memories and tucked her long blonde hair behind her ear. She felt like crying, but couldn't let her sister see her blubbering. She needed to be the strong one. After all, she was almost 12 years old. Not that Daphne would have noticed. At the moment, Sabrina's 7-year-old sister had her face pressed up against the train windows, as she had for the entire 2-hour trip. She marveled at each ugly little dot on the map as they rolled through like they were in Paris, Rome, or Los Angeles. She only took occasional breaks from the view to ask questions about their destination. "Do they have bagels in Ferryport Landing, Miss Smirt?" Daphne asked the woman sitting across from them. Ms. Minerva Smirt was the girls' caseworker from the orphanage. She was a pinch-lipped, humorless woman in her late 50s. As usual, her hooked nose was buried in a book. Sabrina knew she was reading, only so she wouldn't have to talk to them. Miss Smirt looked up at Daphne with an annoyed look and sighed as if the little girl's questions were more than she could bear. "Of course they have bagels. They have bagels everywhere," Miss Smirt snapped. "Not on the moon," Daphne replied matter-of-factly as she returned her gaze at the window. Miss Smirt snarled and Sabrina snickered. It was so easy to get on the woman's nerves, and Daphne was particularly good at it. Smirt had made a terrible mistake when she chose career working with children, Sabrina thought, especially since she didn't seem to like them. The woman complained whenever she had to touch their sticky hands or wipe their runny noses, and reading bedtime stories was completely out of the question. She seemed to especially dislike the Grimm sisters, labeling them rude, uncooperative, and a couple of know-it-alls. So Sabrina was sure it was Miss Smirt's personal mission to get the girls out of the orphanage and into a foster home. So far, she had failed miserably, sending them to live with people who were usually mean and occasionally crazy. Some used them as maids and house sitters, while others just plain ignored them. This time, however, Smirt had gone too far. This time, she was sending them to live with a dead woman. "I hope you won't bother your grandmother with all these ridiculous questions," Miss Smirt said curtly, which was how she said most things to Sabrina and Daphne. "She is old and cannot handle a lot of trouble." "She's dead. I've already told you a million times our grandmother is dead," said Sabrina. "We did a background check, Sally," Miss Smirt replied. "She is who she says she is." "My name is Sabrina," Sabrina sighed. "Whatever. The orphanage would not just release you into one's custody," said Miss Smirt. "Oh, really? How about Miss Langdon, who swore her toilet was haunted?" said Sabrina. "Everyone has their quirks." "Or Miss Dennison, who made us sleep in his truck," Daphne chimed in. "Some people love the great outdoors." "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson handcuffed us to a radiator," Sabrina cried. Miss Smirt rolled her eyes. "You act like it was the end of the world. Imagine how hard this has been on me. I was mortified when I heard what you said to the Kendons." "They locked us in their house for 2 weeks so they could go on a cruise to Bora Bora," Sabrina said. "I think it was the Bahamas," Daphne said. "It was Bermuda, and they brought you both back some lovely t-shirts," said Miss Smirt. "Anyway, it's all water under the bridge now. We found a real relative who is actually eager to take you into her home, and not a moment too soon. To be honest, we have run out of families looking for rude little girls. Even if she were an imposter, I would hand you over to her." With that, Miss Smirt put her nose back in her book. Sabrina looked at the title. It was called How to Get the Love You Want. The conductor's voice rang out from the speakers on the ceiling. He announced that Ferryport Landing was the next and last stop. "What's an imposter?" Daphne asked. "It's a person who pretends to be someone she's not," Sabrina said. "Do you think there's any chance she's really our grandmother?" "Not a chance," Sabrina whispered into her sister's ear. "Dad told me she died before we were even born. No, she's some crackpot, but don't worry. We'll get gone before this crazy old bat knows what happened." The train slowed as it pulled into the station, and passengers got up from their seats. They took down their bags from the luggage racks above and tossed half-read newspapers onto the coffee-stained floor before heading towards the door. "Ladies, let's go," Miss Smirt ordered. Sabrina didn't want to meet this imposter, but she knew better than to argue with the old croon. Smirt had a reputation as a pincher, and she'd left more than a few nasty purple bruises on back-talking orphans. So Sabrina did as she was told and dragged Daphne's and her tiny suitcases down from the rack, then followed Miss Smirt and her sister off the train. The rain was bitingly cold. Daphne shivered, so Sabrina wrapped her arm around her sister's shoulder and held her tightly as they disembarked onto the crowded platform. "The two of you had better be polite, or there's going to be trouble," Miss Smirt said. "No sass, no back talk, stand up straight, and act like young ladies for once, or so help me out. Miss Smirt, a chubby old woman interrupted the caseworker's threat. She was dressed in an ankle-length navy blue dress and had a white knitted shawl around her shoulders. Her gray hair was streaked with red, hinting at its original color, and she wore it tightly tucked under the matching navy blue hat with an applique of a big, fuzzy sunflower in the middle. Her face was a collection of wrinkles and sagging skin. Nevertheless, there was something youthful about her. Perhaps it was her red cheeks and clear green eyes. Next to her stood the skinniest man Sabrina had ever seen. He wore a dark pinstripe suit that was several sizes too big and held a wide umbrella in one hand and his hat in the other. His head was full of untamed platinum hair, and his enormous watery eyes were hidden beneath wild, unkempt eyebrows. Yes, Miss Grimm, it's us, Miss Smirt said, facing her usual frown into a smile. Sabrina, Daphne, the woman cried with a hint of German accent. Oh, you're both so wonderful. What little darlings. I'm your grandmother Grimm. She wrapped her arms around the girls and pulled them close. The girls squirmed to escape, but the old woman was like an over-affectionate octopus. So Grimm, that's the end of the first chapter. Grimm is the name of the person who wrote down Grimm's fairy tales. So that's what this is, okay? It is a flipped fairy tale, which means they take the original story of the fairy tales and they change it to make it more interesting and exciting and adventurous. So I really highly recommend you guys reading the rest of the story. It is a bit long, but there are more that go along with it. They are fantastic, and I really, really do love these stories.
Eager.
Okay? Good luck. Oh, don't forget to answer the questions, guys.